I sure hope some of this content that we cover in Theme 7 feels and sounds familiar to you because you should be reading the book Getting to Yes, and it's all about negotiation. And really, that's one of the core topics that we're going to discuss in this week's theme discussion. By now, you should clearly understand that negotiation is an art form. There are strategic ways you can approach the negotiation process that will enhance your success in achieving your objectives. When negotiation is done incorrectly, it involves people entering into negotiations without any formal strategy, without a plan of action. And as a result, oftentimes they end up making last minute concessions to close the deal. And that does not necessarily end up achieving the overall objectives of your organization. But when done correctly, negotiations can help identify needs and develop solutions that satisfy both yourself and the other party up front. And it helps build value at the front end of the sale. Price actually becomes less of an issue, although certainly we're going to talk about sort of when pricing is an issue in terms of closing the sale. But if you build the value in up front, including through the negotiation process, price tends to become less of an issue at the back end of a sale. Win-win. This is a concept that is discussed throughout the Getting to Yes book, sort of entering into a negotiation with a general philosophy that a negotiation isn't a win-lose proposition, that negotiations can and very much should be win-win propositions. Negotiating skills have application in almost all parts of our daily life. We negotiate all the time. I negotiate with my spouse and with my children. To some extent, I negotiate with students. I'm more open to negotiation with my fourth year students in terms of, for example, when an assignment is due or what are the expectations around a particular project. I negotiate less with my first year students in large part because there's more of them, and obviously the more people involved in the negotiation makes it more difficult, but also I don't necessarily think that they have the same level of understanding. They don't approach it necessarily from a win-win perspective in the same way I would, and in the same way my fourth year students do. Any agreement that leaves one of the parties in the negotiation dissatisfied actually is not a win-win situation. That will very often come back to hurt you in the long run, and so having a win-win philosophy is really important. A win-win philosophy is grown out of the foundation of trust and strong rapport, and negotiation is very much a partnership. It's not an us versus them. It is a collaboration to find a solution to a complex set of problems. After you've figured out that solution that matches the customer's needs and your own needs as an organization, then you must select a presentation strategy that you're going to use to emphasize how this is a win-win for both parties. So again, negotiation is all about working to reach an agreement that is mutually satisfactory to both parties. It is not I win, you lose. That is not what good negotiation is all about. Through the negotiation process, you attempt to resolve problems or any concerns that may ultimately prevent people from making a purchase, from buying from you. Win-win relationships, are the best types of relationships for long-term results. Win-lose might work in the very short term, but as we've discussed really since the beginning of this class, sales today is really about building those long-term relationships, and a win-lose sort of mentality does not cultivate long-term relationships. So you have to focus on a win-win scenario. You don't typically or shouldn't think of negotiation as a one-time deal. Negotiations usually and should sort of be a part of a longer-term relationship with a client. Negotiations can take place before the sales presentation, meeting times, locations, who's going to be there, how the participation is going to unfold, the length of the meeting, all those kinds of things should actually take place before you actually sit down to discuss what the real issues are. It can take place anytime during the sales presentation, but it's really the most important during the final stages of the buying process. Hopefully by then you've established some rapport, you've demonstrated some clear value, and the negotiations can take place built on that foundation. Early concessions, if you give in on things too early in the negotiation process, that can actually have a detrimental effect on the overall negotiations. It sets a bad precedent. That doesn't mean you shouldn't provide value early on in the negotiations, but you don't want to give in on concessions too early in the negotiations because it does set a precedent, and that can be hard to overcome later on in the negotiation process. Very often, professional buyers are well-trained negotiators, so it's really important for you to do your homework. And there are actual courses and programs that you can take around negotiation. For example, our MBA program here at UPEI actually has a very, very highly regarded course within the MBA program around negotiation and conflict resolution. And we find we get students from outside of our MBA program who want to come to UPEI just to take that course. It has been so popular, so effective, and so impactful for the people who have taken it. It's got an incredibly good reputation in the broader community, and it's so you can take courses to learn how to be a better negotiator. You want to gather as much information as possible before the negotiations. Exhaustive preparation is way more important than having a good or aggressive argument. So preparation is key for negotiations, but in particular when negotiating with people who are highly skilled negotiators. From both parties' points of view, you want to identify commonalities, similarities, and any differences in the overall goals and objectives really early on so that you know where you're starting from in the negotiations. You want to decide how the negotiations are going to unfold. Is it going to be team-based or individual-based for both the buyer and seller? So what role do the various parties involved in this whole process, what role do they play? And making sure that everyone is really well equipped to play those roles. Making sure there is a leader and that there's established guidelines for how information is going to be exchanged. You don't want to get into a negotiation situation where two members of the same team have differing views and there's been no decision within that team as to how internal conflicts or decisions are going to get made. And you want to understand the value of what it is you're offering. What is the most important thing, part of the value proposition to the partner or the group you're negotiating with, and figure out how to convey that. What are the tangible aspects of the value that you're providing, and what are those really important intangible aspects of value that are also really, really important. If we were doing this course in person, we actually have a negotiation simulation that comes out of the Harvard School of Business, or out of Harvard. I'm not sure if it's a School of Business or not, but it's a negotiation simulation. We did it last year. It went really well. Unfortunately, it's the kind of thing you need to do in person, and obviously we weren't able to do that this year. But there are actually lots of really good programs and courses about negotiations, and certainly one of those fundamental resources is actually the book that you're reading, Getting to Yes. There are a couple of important acronyms. These you should have seen at least a couple of these in the Getting to Yes book. The BATNA, or the Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement, is an idea that you determine what your overall goals and objectives are, and you figure out the agreement that doesn't necessarily satisfy all of those, but it's the best alternative that you're going to come up with. The ZOPA, the Zone of Possible Agreement, is that space between where you're going to walk away and where you're going to be willing to continue to have the dialogue. So you need to understand exactly where that common ground is and how far apart you and the person you're negotiating with are, and what are those ceilings and what are those floors of those negotiations. You do want to prepare an agenda, particularly if you're, first of all, period, you need to have an agenda. It's important. And the agenda should very clearly specify what will and will not be discussed during the meeting. And you want to prioritize the agenda so that there's some early wins for your partner in the negotiation. It helps to create goodwill and help them feel like the negotiation is progressing in a way that satisfies their need. Sometimes negotiations happen over multiple meetings, not just a single meeting. It's not uncommon. So an agenda is really important for those kinds of negotiations because it lets you focus on specifically what we're going to talk about during this meeting, and everything else gets sort of reserved for another meeting. So that can be a really helpful way to make meaningful progress, especially if there's multiple areas where you need to find common ground. You do want to, of course, review your adaptive selling styles and sort of some of the presentation styles that we've covered earlier. And ultimately remember this platinum rule, I guess, of negotiating: do unto others as they want to be done unto. So make sure that you're treating people fairly, you're disclosing information that needs to be disclosed, that you're treating people fairly and equitably and transparently, because that's how good relationships develop. So back to this sort of golden rule or platinum rule, there's all kinds of names for it. You do need to understand the problem. Is it a misunderstanding? Are we not talking about the same thing, or is there an actual disagreement? And you'd be surprised how often what is perceived as disagreement is actually just a misunderstanding. And so really delving in and trying to make sure that you understand what's going on is really important. And you do that through asking questions and keeping the dialogue open. You want to create alternative solutions that ultimately can add value. So, giving options that ultimately will satisfy your client's concerns, giving people their personal attention, making sure any solutions that you present are in fact meeting the unique needs of your customer, and also giving people time to think about things is very often a good response. People don't like to feel pressured or like they're on the spot, so giving people time to think about things is important. Periodically reviewing things that you've already agreed on. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're struggling over coming to an agreement, one of the ways to deal with that is actually to go back and just remind each other of the things that you've already agreed on. And it sort of sets the tone for, hey, we've been able to figure out how to make this work in these other situations. I'm confident that we can find a way to make it work in this particular situation. So those are really good strategies. And again, don't make concessions too quickly. Concessions is not a good substitution for good strategic selling and negotiations. Two other things to consider with respect to the golden rule. Time is a strategic advantage and weapon that you can use. People, including yourself, tend to benefit when they take a moment to step back from a situation, reflect calmly and without emotion. You tend to make better decisions that way. And so it's okay. In fact, it's advantageous for both you and for the person you're negotiating with to stop at critical points, take a break, collect your thoughts, remove yourself from the immediacy of the situation, and better decisions tend to get made in those kinds of situations. It's also really important to know when to walk away. Sometimes that's hard to do. You get invested in the negotiation process and perhaps too invested in this idea of winning, but there are always times when it makes sense to walk away, and it's important to know before the negotiation starts exactly what that point is. Ultimately when any decision that stems from this negotiation is not going to be favorable for your company, for example. So also, sort of as you're working your way through the negotiation process, it is incredibly important to document through careful records or minutes of the meetings anything that you agree on. So if you find at various points during the negotiation you've reached an agreement, before you move on to the next item on the agenda, it is important to get that agreement in writing so that when people go back, you have a very clear record of what was decided collectively through the negotiation process. There are a couple of broad types of buyer concerns that you might hear about during a negotiation process. And understanding what types of buyer concerns are out there helps you do a better job of preparing how you might respond to those concerns should they arise. The first one is concerns about whether or not the other party actually needs the product. Is this something that they actually need, is actually going to provide value, provide solutions to them, or is this not something that they need at all? And so figuring out this is where you really need to show the value proposition for your product and how it's going to resolve a problem that your partner in the negotiations may not even recognize or feel that they have. The second one is concerns about the product or service itself. Is this product going to meet a particular need and resolve a particular problem that the organization or the party is having? So things like third-party testimonials and demonstrations and guarantees can be very helpful in helping to alleviate any concerns that a buyer might have about a particular product or service. You want to present the product or service. You want to show how it is satisfactory, how it specifically helps address the specific concerns that are unique to your buyer. The third type of buyer is concerned with the source. They may have a difficult relationship with your company, your salespeople, your brand, etc. And so it's really important at this point to understand and work really hard to identify exactly what the problems are. Is it because they have had a bad experience with a particular salesperson? If so, is a possible solution bringing in a different salesperson? Or is the possible solution helping the salesperson reestablish that damaged rapport with the other person? You want to point out the superior benefits and how your product really can provide value and stay as visible and connected as possible during this particular stage of the negotiations. Continuing on with the various types of buyers, you have people that are concerned, or the concerns are related to time. They don't really need this product right now, or they need some time to think about it. And while a few slides ago we did talk about the importance of giving people a little bit of time to reflect and consider the options, there is such a thing as actually too much time. And so it's a very delicate balance between providing that space, that mental space, to allow a buyer to think about and consider what they've been hearing and what's been presented to them, but also giving them too much time is a real problem. So you want to have a plan or a strategy in place to demonstrate how making this decision now is actually beneficial to the organization. And lastly, concerns related to price. This is very often what at least seems to be the foundation or common form of resistance to a negotiated agreement, but often price is just used as an excuse. And if you take some time to actually dig a little bit deeper, the issue isn't necessarily tied to price. There's other issues, and your negotiation partner is using price as basically an excuse for not coming to an agreement. So how do you go about negotiating through these buyer concerns? Well, you can outright point out that any concern is not valid, and you want to do this very carefully. How people perceive things is every bit as important as reality. So you don't want to say, oh, that's a stupid concern, you don't need to worry about that, but you can directly refute, preferably by using evidence, that the concern is really not valid, but you need to do it very carefully so as not to alienate the other party. You can indirectly offer a denial and sort of show people in a more subtle way why their concern isn't something that they should actually be concerned about. You can let people have some physical connection, the feel, felt, found kind of response. I understand that you're feeling this way. Other people have felt this way as well, but when they actually used our product, they found this. And so it's really acknowledging that their concerns are valid from their perspective, but that if they look at the situation through other people's eyes, they may find that other people who experienced this actually came to a satisfactory resolution. You can ask questions to try to get to the root of what the concern is. This is particularly important, for example, as we mentioned in the last slide, when the concerns seem like they might be around price. Very often when you dig a little bit deeper and ask a few more questions, you'll find that the concern really isn't about price at all. And so it's really important to help you understand what the concerns really are about, that you ask questions. You can, of course, reiterate the superior value or benefit that your product offers. You can offer things like demonstrations to make abstract ideas come more alive and be more sort of real and tangible for the buyer. That often can help. You can offer a trial offer. Again, this doesn't always help resolve problems. Sometimes that's just not practical, but oftentimes you can offer some sort of opportunity to try out a product to see if it works. You can offer third-party testimonials, whereby it's not you that's responding to a customer's concern, but they're hearing about resolutions to any concerns through a third party. You can actually postpone and just say, you know what, we can get back to that later, and hopefully by the time you do, you've really resolved any other concerns that they might have, and maybe will find the ability to get over this particular concern easier because you found so many areas of commonality. Or you can use a combination of these methods to help address any buyer's concerns that you have during the negotiation process. As we mentioned a few slides ago, how you deal with price concerns is really important. It's a very common area of concern for during negotiation processes, and so it's important to really understand how you might be able to deal with those. The first is, of course, to ask questions, to really dig deeper, to make sure that it actually is in fact an issue or a concern around price and not disguised as something else. You want to ultimately provide value to your customer and demonstrate that value through a cluster of satisfactions, that reminding them that price is only one component of overall satisfaction. And you don't want to make price the focal point of your sales presentation. It's important. You also don't want to avoid any conversations about pricing, but you don't want it to be the focal point. The focal point should always be about value. You don't want to apologize for the price. Be very careful about that. Apologizing for the price suggests that it's not justifiable, and that you're maybe perhaps ripping people off. Don't apologize for your price, and know what your floor price is. Very often people are sort of, I guess, incentivized by getting the sale and will compromise their pricing strategies to achieve that. But in the long run, it really can cause irreparable damage to your brand and to your reputation. So be very, very careful about your pricing strategy and don't apologize for it. Point out the relationship between quality and price. You do get what you pay for. And so just because another option that's in the marketplace is lower price, if you can point out that the quality is also substantially lower, then you can sort of help the customer make those connections. You also want to explain and demonstrate the difference between price and cost. The price is what you pay for something, but the cost incurred is more than just the dollar value. It could include things like reputation, overall quality, brand investments, those sorts of things. And so there is a difference between price and cost, and sometimes people need to be reminded of that. Many salespeople are empowered to use discount strategies, and it's not that you shouldn't use those. They can be a really powerful way of achieving an agreement in a negotiation. You just want to be really careful that you're not using them prematurely, and as a result, perhaps even eroding the value of the product that you're selling. It's really important to think carefully about how you're going to work with buyers who are trained and experts in negotiation. There's a bunch of tactics that they may employ, and you need to be aware of those tactics and understand ultimately where they're coming from and understand what options you have available to you as the seller in the negotiation process in terms of ways to respond. We're not going to go through all of these in detail, but talking about budget limits. Well, I can only spend, I don't have authorization to spend a certain amount of money. So there's ways of dealing with that. Maybe you unbundle or repackage the product offering. The sort of if-then scenarios that people often will resort to in the negotiation process. Things like take it or leave it tactics, and sort of understanding where the power balance is in those kinds of situations. Let's split the difference tactic is very common, especially for people who don't really thrive or feel comfortable in conflict type situations. They often compromise by saying, well, let's just split the difference. And at the end of the day, that may work, but it may not as well. And so you want to be careful about that. Let's sell now and make profits later. This tactic is sort of sell low, reduce your price, get the customer hooked, and then reverse that strategy as the buyer becomes a more regular customer. That can backfire as well in the long term. So it is really important to think about how you as a seller in the negotiation process might respond when these scenarios pop up. So once you've reached an agreement, you now come to the part of the selling process that's called closing. Closing is basically where you end the conversation. This is the point at which you've agreed to at least most of the significant outstanding topics in the negotiation, and you're now looking to close the sale. You want to be very careful. You don't want to use any method of closing that is perceived by the customer as pushy or manipulative, because that will damage long-term relationships. Even if you do get the sale, the long-term damage may not be beneficial. You want to use positive need satisfaction questions. You want to ask for the order is the next logical step, and you want to prepare for the close, which is about understanding what the customer's needs are, how your product custom fits. There's a custom fit solution, and plan for how you're going to close the sale. Some guidelines on closing the sale. You want to focus on the primary reasons why the customer is looking to buy in the first place, and focus on those, and for the most part, forget the other aspects of the value proposition. Focus on those ones that are important to your buyer. By this point in the selling process, you should know what those are. Longer selling cycles may require multiple commitments. You may need to get multiple commitments through a very lengthy time period. And of course, you want to document those along the way so that you don't have to go back and revisit issues that have been resolved. You want to negotiate through any tough points before attempting to close. You don't want to try and close a sale when there's still important items left to be negotiated. You want to avoid surprises for the customer at the very end, things like extra charges or delivery times that aren't going to meet the customer's requirements. Tough-mindedness, a display of high degree of confidence. You do want to look like you're confident, that you want to come across that you've satisfied all their needs, that you're confident that your product is going to meet their needs and satisfy all their concerns. You don't want to be apologetic. You want to present this image of somebody who's confident that the customer at the end of the day is winning. And you may need to ultimately ask for their order more than once. You want to be able to recognize the cues from your customer that suggest it's time to go in for the close of the sale. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody And the conversation could have been really interesting and engaging, but the conversation has naturally come to an end, but it doesn't end. It's really important to know and to watch for cues that the customer is ready to make a decision and wants to wrap this up. Some closing cues include both verbal and nonverbal indications that they're ready to make a decision. Many of these cues are really quite subtle, and so having really good empathy skills can help you to detect those. You want to look for verbal cues like questions. Have the number of questions dwindled, meaning that they don't have many questions left, or has the nature of the questions, do they suggest that they're ready to make a decision? Have they acknowledged or recognized the agreements that you've come that you've come to, and therefore there's nothing left to resolve? And is it clear that you've met all of their requirements? Some nonverbal cues include facial expressions and body language, and sort of behavior that indicates they're ready to move on to the final stage of the buying process. There are various types of closings that you may want to consider. There's the trial close. This could be a good option if there's still some hesitation or some unresolved concerns. A trial close can help you sort of bridge the gap between where you are and where you need to be in order to get a full closure of the sale. So it could involve, letting the customer try out the product or whatever, but it gives them an opportunity to see if they're satisfied with the product before they make a final commitment. And that's a good way to help any customers who, again, have that sort of lingering reservation to overcome those reservations. The direct appeal close is simply asking for their order in a straightforward manner. There's nothing hidden or subtle about it. It's directly asking, can I write up the bill of sale for you? At this point, if you ask the question, are you ready to make the sale? You want to stop talking and be patient. You do want to give people, again, a chance to come to a decision without feeling pressured or manipulated to come to that decision. And you can ask questions to determine how close the customer is to making a decision, and that might indicate or give you some clues as to whether or not you should actually directly offer a direct appeal close. There's also the assumptive close, which asks for a minor decision, assuming that the customer has already made the decision to buy. This is risky. It's a take it for granted type close. It can feel manipulative to people who pick up on your strategy, but it also can be very subtle and can actually be very effective. It tends to work well when there's a lot or a high level of trust involved in the relationship. It doesn't necessarily work as well when those formative relationship dynamics haven't yet been really well developed. Continuing on, the summary of benefits close, where you feel like you've come to a natural point in the conversation where it's time to summarize all of the benefits so that your buyer is really left with little to decide other than, yes, I'm going to make this purchase. So if you can summarize those benefits, it clearly lays out the logical reason why the customer needs to say or should say yes. You also can have some special concession close strategies, which offers customers something a little extra for acting immediately. Some customers can be skeptical about this, especially if the concessions are in the form of price discounts that were not offered up earlier on in the negotiation process. It can seem manipulative or sort of self-serving. But in some cases, it also can work. And so if you have some concessions that really aren't all that important to you, that haven't been discussed or resolved earlier on in the negotiation process, and you think this might be enough to tip the balance in favor of making the sale, it can be an effective strategy as well. And of course, as with everything, you can use multiple options or combinations of these options to help close the sale. The management close is where the people who are negotiating have come to an agreement, but they have to bring it back to their manager for ultimate approval. So that's it's a way of actually abdicating your responsibility and sort of deferring it to somebody else. But it's not uncommon at all. We just purchased a car for my son. My husband and the salesperson reached an agreement on the price, but the salesperson had to get management approval for the price. And so that was just an opportunity or I guess an out for that salesperson. It was another sort of level of decision making that that person didn't have. So that's a type of closing. An impending event close, making a positive use of a negative point. So maybe a sale is coming up or it's ending soon, or a certain promotional strategy is ending soon, or there's something that's coming, an impending event that actually makes it imperative that a decision gets made now rather than later. Believe it or not, the closing is actually one of the more challenging steps of the buying process or the selling process, excuse me. And it's important, therefore, that salespeople actually start practicing the closing part of the sales process and gain experience using the various techniques that we've described here and in previous weeks that ultimately will help you achieve your objectives and your organization's objectives. Role playing is the best known way to sort of practice those types of interactions and get the feelings that accompany closing and practicing those skills that you need to negotiate and to close a sale. So practicing is really important if you get those opportunities. So what do you do when a buyer says yes? You of course want to confirm and reassure them that the sale has been closed and work very hard to reduce any potential buyer's remorse or feelings of regret that a client might have and that are not uncommon after a purchase is made. You want to reiterate that this was a really good choice and that you're very confident that the buyer is going to be satisfied and that you're going to do everything you can to ensure the buyer is satisfied. You want to offer your appreciation. And going back to what I just said in a couple of slides ago, we did just buy a new vehicle for my son. We bought it from a dealership in town. It wasn't a brand new car, but it wasn't an old car. It had 23,000 kilometers on it. So my husband purchased the vehicle. We brought it home, and a few days later, we got a little card in the mail. And it was addressed to my husband, so I didn't open it. I assumed it was a thank you note. Thank you for your business. We really appreciate it. If you have any questions or concerns about the vehicle, let us know. Enjoy the new car. When we opened it, it was actually just a printed standard, basically contact information for the dealership. There was no handwriting on it. It was not signed by the salesperson who sort of did the transaction. There was absolutely nothing of any personal nature on the card at all. There was no writing. It was simply a standard form printed card. And both my husband and I commented, how hard would it have been for the salesperson just to have said, thank you for your business, enjoy the new vehicle, and sign their name. But that seemed like we were left with the impression that that was too much of an effort for the salesperson to do and really kind of turned us off. We're satisfied with the vehicle that we got, satisfied with the price, satisfied with all aspects of that, not particularly satisfied with the salesperson, and really have no sense of loyalty or feeling of need that, should we be in the market for another vehicle in the future, the salesperson is not somebody we would seek out as a potential salesperson we want to do business with again. It's not that we wouldn't do business with them again. They didn't do anything to impress us that they deserved our business a second time around. Of course, when the buyer says yes, it's also a good time, especially if it's clear that they're very satisfied, that you can ask for a referral. Typically, you only ask for referrals when you do have a bit of a rapport or relationship with the customer. But certainly opening the door for possibilities of referral is a good idea at this stage. But what do you do when the buyer says no? You do want to do some analysis to make sure the deal is really dead. I'm a big proponent that no means no. But when it comes to sales, no may be a stalling tactic that a buyer is using through the negotiation process. So you really want to make sure the deal is dead before you accept the no and move on. You can review the chain of events and debrief with the team to see, where perhaps things went wrong, and if those issues are resolvable. You can, if possible, interview the customer to learn why ultimately you lost the sale. You want, of course, be delicate and sensitive. Your buyer may not want to talk to you about this, but ultimately, even if the only thing you achieve through this is to leave the door open for future sales, it may be worthwhile keeping those lines of communications opened. You want to do everything possible to help the customer make a good decision. You can review your strong points one more time. You can emphasize the competitive advantage. You can schedule a follow-up to reconnect with them after they've maybe looked at other options out in the marketplace. And you want to make it easy for the person to buy your product at some point in the future. So maybe the answer is no for today, but maybe 6 months down the road, they'll be more open to the possibility of saying yes. So be really careful. You don't want to overstep or damage the relationship by not accepting no for an answer. But at the same time, you want to leave the possibility out there for that no to turn into a yes at some point in the future. Service. These are all of the activities that ultimately enhance or facilitate the sale and use of the product. Service is critically important in the sales industry, and good service can be the difference between making the sale and building long-term customer relationships or not. Servicing the sale encompasses a wide variety of activities that take place during and after the buying process. Customer retention through value-based service can mean the difference between increasing or eroding your market share. It could be the difference between repeat business and not repeat business, as I was just mentioning to you with respect to buying the new car. Satisfied customers represent an auxiliary sales force. They can be out there representing you and your business to other customers, which is a really great way to expand your sales network. Groups of people who recommend customer-driven organizations to others helps goods get sold. Right? It's really good service. If you get good service, people will tell, the book is saying 6 people, but you'll tell a few people if you get good service. However, if you get outstanding service, you're going to tell a lot more people. And so that helps build your sales network over time. Long-term successive sales involve partnering efforts that result in sale after sale after sale and exponentially things like referrals. You want to demonstrate added value over time, that the value that a company derives wasn't all front-end loaded, that there's actually continued value after the sale. So things like timely delivery, getting products installed, accurate invoicing, resolving any tech problems that might arise, helping make contacts within the industry, so helping them expand their business can be a really beneficial way of enhancing successive sales. And customer advocacy, taking the customer's point of view and advocating on their behalf, really does help in long-term sales. So after the sale, what are the expectations? Well, customers are enormously punishing when companies don't meet their expectations. Customers buy expectation of benefits from the salespersons as they were promised. So customers do have expectations that extend beyond the closing of the sales deal. Customers expect salespeople to remember the purchase as a favor and think of that person in a favorable light. When the team is responding to increased expectations, be certain the customer strategy is on target, that you're meeting their specific needs. Focus like a laser beam on follow through and follow up activities. That's really critical. You can do a lot of damage to a relationship if you don't follow through on commitments that you've made. And you want to re-examine your product strategy to make sure that on an ongoing basis, it's the best fit for your customer. This is just a quick chart that shows you in a visual way. It's a lot more expensive to regain lost customers or to bring in new customers than it is to keep current customers. It makes good economic sense to make sure your existing customers are happy and satisfied. It costs less money to keep them than it is to get new customers or regain lost customers. Why do companies lose business? 70% of the reason for attrition is poor service. 70% of the reasons why customers switch buyers or switch suppliers or salespeople is for poor service. Only 15% is tied to a dissatisfaction with the product or price considerations. So that's how important service is to the sales process. Some good customer service behaviors is to be diligent. You want to be responsive and reliable. You want to do what you say you're going to do and do it quickly and in a timely manner. You want to have very clear and concise communication and provide all the relevant information that the customer needs, again, in a timely, accurate, and reliable format. You want to offer inducements and personalize the relationship wherever possible. This goes back to this idea of the thank you card that we got from the car dealership after we just purchased a new vehicle. There was absolutely nothing personalized about that communication. It was standard. I would guess every person who buys a car gets the same card, and there was nothing personalized about it. You want to engender empathy and show empathy, that you understand the customer and their experiences and can relate to them. And you want to be a good sport. Let's say you didn't get the sale. You don't want to harbor ill feelings. You want to look past those for the benefit of the long-term relationship. Follow through. It's one of the easiest things, or should be one of the easiest stages of the selling process, but it's also commonly an area where salespeople fall short. It's important that you follow through with whatever it is you committed to doing for your customer, and to make sure that they're satisfied. So it's everything, including making credit arrangements and scheduling deliveries. If at all possible, you want to be there during deliveries and monitoring things like installation. You want to offer training and support in the care and use of the product. Make sure that the customer is comfortable in how best to use the product. You want to provide any information that is different than what you originally agreed upon. And you want to prevent any post-sale problems, like issues with credit or shipping or billing. So it's really important that follow-through be an integral part of the selling process for you. In terms of follow-up, there's two major objectives. One is to express appreciation for the continued business and the relationship. Those kinds of things, showing gratitude, helps to enhance relationships. You also want to make sure that your customer is satisfied with their purchase, because if they aren't, you want to know early so that you can resolve any outstanding issues. Follow-up can be in person, it can be over the telephone, it can be through email or a letter or card, and it really is dependent on the nature of the relationship, the kind of product or service that's being sold. Those things will determine whether it should entail a personal visit or whether a card in the mail is going to be sufficient. But it is really important to follow up with your customers and to show gratitude. After you followed up, or as part of the follow-up process, you want to actually take some time as a salesperson and to provide a written summary of all the information pertaining to the sale so that you have a corporate record of exactly sort of how the sale unfolded, any issues that might uh, need resolving in the future. Maybe there's a follow-up plan in terms of when you're going to check in with this individual. It also could help you through documentation to expand your selling, to maybe make connections using that network that you're developing through this original sale to enhance or improve or expand your selling to other customers or to sell more to your existing customers. So follow up and making written documentation is really, really important. Very often there will be selling opportunities that happen after the sale. So things like cross-selling or upselling, which is really about selling more products to a customer after you've achieved the original sale. And it's really a great way to expand your selling performance. If you've already got a satisfied customer, it's easier to sell them more than it is to bring in new customers. And so these are really good strategies to enhance your overall selling performance. It often is well received by customers, especially if they're really satisfied with the original purchase. It can be a real way to get the most value out of those really important customer relationships. But what do you do if you have an unhappy customer? This can be really tough. You want to view any complaints as an opportunity to resolve the issue and to strengthen the business relationship. You want to gather as much information about the complaint or concern as you can, and you want to provide unique opportunities to resolve any concerns that might be outstanding. It's really important. How you handle unhappy customers is really important. You want to give customers every opportunity to disclose their feelings and to validate those feelings. Keep in mind that it doesn't matter whether the complaint is real or perceived. To the customer, it's important. And so you need to validate and not dismiss their perspective. Do not offer excuses. You want to accept responsibility and work to resolve the problem. You can certainly politely share your point of view concerning the problem, but you don't want to be accusatory or defensive or angry in how you deal with that. And you need to decide what actions must be taken to remedy the problem, because at the end of the day, you want to turn an unhappy customer into a happy customer, if at all possible. Lastly, when a minor problem arises or comes to the surface, you want to deal with the problem directly. You do not want to delegate this to somebody else. You do not want to use email. You want to resolve issues on a personal level, whether it's a phone call or a visit with the person. This is not the time to be using impersonal forms of communication. If you need to offer an apology, you need to do so right away. Schedule that appointment and do it sincerely and honestly, face to face, if at all possible. Some of this would sound very familiar from the not Getting to Yes, but How to Win Friends and Influence People book that you read. If you need to offer an apology, do so, and do so sincerely. Those things can go a long way in mending damaged or broken relationships.